Hotel worker saves a baby from choking, gets fired for disrupting service. The sound of shoes clicking on the polished floor echoed through the grand lobby of the Lux Grand Hotel. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and gold trim lined the walls. Everything about the place whispered elegance, clean, quiet, perfect. But behind the perfect shine was a man quietly tying his apron, adjusting the collar of his white uniform in the staff room mirror. He looked calm on the outside, but inside, his heart carried a heavy weight. He took a deep breath and checked his phone. A message from his wife popped up. "We're out of milk, and the baby kicked so hard today. Can't wait to see you tonight." He smiled for a moment. His wife was 7 months pregnant. Their firstborn had just turned 5. Rent was due in 4 days. Their health insurance came through this job, and he couldn't afford a single mistake. He wasn't new to pressure. For the last 5 years, he'd worked at this hotel, starting as a dishwasher, slowly earning his way up to being a waiter in their high-end restaurant. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and he was proud of how far he'd come. Every shift he worked, he did with full focus and care, making sure each guest felt important, even when they barely noticed him. As he stepped out into the dining area, the luxury around him sparkled. Soft jazz music played in the background. White linen tablecloths were perfectly straight. Guests spoke in low, polished tones, dressed in designer suits and silk dresses. This was a place where everything had to be perfect. One small mistake, a glass slightly out of line, a plate late by a minute, and it could be written up. He knew this all too well. There were moments, quiet ones, that reminded him he was different. A guest's subtle pause when he approached. A manager's tone that was just a little too sharp. A coworker's smile that didn't quite reach the eyes. He never said anything, never made a scene. He just worked harder, moved faster, smiled longer. That morning, the manager barely looked at him before saying, "We're short-staffed. I need you to cover 2 extra tables today." No thanks, no choice, just expectation. He nodded without arguing, even though his knees still ached from yesterday's shift. He told himself the same thing he told himself every day. Keep your head down. Do your job. Get home safe. But something was different today. He couldn't explain it. There was a strange energy in the air. The restaurant was already buzzing with early lunch reservations, business lunches, anniversary celebrations, people talking about money and deals and expensive wines. He moved like a machine, taking orders, balancing plates, folding napkins, keeping smiles pasted across his face. He noticed details like he always did. A woman's heels clicking too fast. A man tapping his spoon over and over, impatient. A crying baby in the distance, quickly hushed. And all the while, he thought of his family. Of the rent bill sitting on the kitchen table. Of his son, who had drawn a picture of his dad wearing an apron, smiling next to a cartoon plate. "Daddy at work," it said in crayon. He thought about that photo and smiled through the pain in his feet. Nobody at the hotel knew what he carried on his shoulders. They saw a waiter. They didn't see the man who skipped meals so his wife could eat enough during pregnancy. They didn't see the man who picked up every weekend shift without complaining. They didn't see the man who stayed silent when others would have spoken up, just to keep his job. Today felt like any other day, until it didn't. Because in just a few minutes, something would happen that would change everything. He had no way of knowing it yet, no way to prepare. But in the quiet hum of the restaurant, among the clinking of silverware and the low conversations of people who barely saw him, a single moment was waiting. One that would test his strength, his courage, and his whole future. And it was coming fast. The rush hit hard around noon. The restaurant floor was already packed, and more guests were flowing in, each of them expecting flawless service. There was no room for error, no time to breathe. Every table had a story unfolding, job interviews, tense business deals, anniversary dates, tourists snapping quiet selfies with their plates. And in the middle of it all moved the waiter, balanced, focused, graceful like a dancer with sore feet. My. Carried trays heavy enough to make his arms burn. He smiled at rude guests who didn't bother to look him in the eye. He apologized when they spilled water and they acted like it was his fault. He worked as if invisible, because that's what the job sometimes demanded. Just get through the shift, stay calm, don't make it worse. The maitre d' stopped him mid-step. "You've got a new table, section 4, near the window." He nodded, already turning to scan the room. At that table, a well-dressed man and woman were sitting down, their clothes expensive, their posture sharp and polished. They were deep in conversation, brows furrowed, clearly caught up in something important. Behind them, a nanny juggled a squirming baby, a diaper bag, and a folding high chair. She looked tired, flustered, like she was trying not to be seen. Watched for just a moment, not out of curiosity, but because he always did this. Observed. Anticipated. That's what made him good at his job. He could tell who needed space, who needed speed, who wanted to be pampered. This table? Complicated. A toddler in a fine dining restaurant always meant extra work. More cleanups, more patience. But he didn't complain. He never did. As he walked over to greet them, he heard bits of their conversation. The man was muttering something about a deal falling through while checking his phone. The woman responded in a low, clipped voice. They were there, physically, but their minds were somewhere else. "Good afternoon," the waiter said with a warm smile. "Welcome to the Lux Grand. My name is..." The man cut him off with a wave. "Bring your best bottle of champagne and something to keep the kid quiet." The waiter nodded, politely ignoring the tone. "Right away, sir." He didn't take it personally. He couldn't afford to. That's the first thing you learn in a place like this. Never let a guest's mood become your own. Let it roll off your back like rain on glass. As he walked away, he glanced back at the nanny. She was trying to calm the baby with a small piece of bread, shushing gently, her eyes darting toward the parents as if afraid to disturb them. It tugged at something inside him. Maybe because he was a father too. Maybe because he knew what it was like to feel small in a place built for people with more power than you. He didn't have time to think about it. The orders kept coming. His section had more guests now, each one needing something urgently. He was everywhere at once, carrying plates, refilling glasses, folding napkins, answering questions, dodging other servers. One table wanted their meal gluten-free. Another complained their wine wasn't cold enough. One woman called him over just to ask what was in the dressing, then waved him away mid-sentence. Still, he moved with calm, with grace. Not because he was happy, but because he had no choice. His job depended on it. He didn't know that while he balanced 3 steaming plates across the dining room, a tiny pair of hands at table 4 was slowly grabbing at another piece of bread. He didn't know that in just a minute, everything he thought he understood about this job and this world was about to collapse. But he would know soon, because at that fancy table by the window, while the parents scrolled through business emails and the nanny bent to retrieve a dropped toy, the baby started to choke, and nobody noticed, except him. At first, it was just a flicker, a strange kind of stillness in a room full of motion. The waiter had just stepped away from table 4, a tray balanced on his palm, the other hand adjusting a pepper grinder for another guest. But something felt wrong. He couldn't explain it. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the years of watching people more closely than they ever realized. But his eyes drifted back toward the family near the window. And that's when he saw it. The baby wasn't making a sound. No cry, no fuss, no laugh, just silence. Her cheeks were puffed, turning a shade darker than they should have been. Her arms waved wildly, eyes wide, mouth open, but nothing came out. The nanny hadn't noticed. Yet, she was still crouched, trying to pick up the baby's dropped pacifier from the floor. The parents? Still locked in conversation. Still scrolling through emails. Still utterly unaware that their child was in serious danger. The tray in his hand suddenly felt a mile away. He didn't hesitate. He didn't think. He just moved. He handed off the tray to a nearby server without a word and took off across the restaurant, his steps long, focused, fast. Not rushed, not panicked, just locked in. The room didn't react right away. The background music kept playing. Forks still clinked. But a few heads turned, curious. The nanny saw him coming first, her eyes widening as she followed his line of sight and turned to the child. That's when the panic hit. "Oh my God, she's choking!" the nanny gasped, pulling the child from the high chair. But her hands trembled too much, and she froze in fear, unsure of what to do. The waiter arrived in a second. "Give her to me," he said, calm but firm. The nanny didn't argue. She handed over the child, who was now completely red in the face, lips starting to turn blue. The father finally looked up, confused. "What the hell? What's going on?" The mother stood too, her chair screeching across the polished floor. But the waiter didn't explain. There was no time. He gently but quickly turned the baby face down across his arm, supporting her head. Then, using the heel of his free hand, he gave 5 quick back blows between the shoulder blades, just like he had learned years ago during a CPR course when his first child was born. Nothing. He flipped the baby onto her back, still in the crook of his arm, supporting her neck. 2 fingers pressed against her chest, quick and precise. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Still no sound. The entire restaurant froze. Silence spread like a wave. A knife dropped. A wine glass sat mid-air, untouched. Guests stared, mouths slightly open, holding their breath along with the baby, and then a cough. It was faint at first, then louder, then a soft, wheezy cry. The waiter turned the baby upright and gently patted her back as she began to cry louder, stronger, fuller, air finally filling her lungs. A small chunk of soggy bread fell from her lips onto the white tablecloth. She was breathing. Alive. The mother's hands flew to her face as she let out a sob. The father stumbled around the table, his mouth moving but no sound coming out. The waiter cradled the baby just a moment longer, checking her breathing, watching her color come back. Then, slowly and gently, he handed her back to her mother. "She's okay now," he said softly, his voice shaking just slightly. The mother took the baby in her arms and held her like she would never let go again. She kissed her head, her tiny fingers, her cheeks. The baby sobbed, now more from fear than pain. But she was safe. I don't know how to thank you," the father finally said, stepping forward, his voice cracked and barely holding together. You saved her. You saved our baby." The waiter didn't say anything for a second. He just looked at the child, alive in her mother's arms. "I'm just glad I saw her in time," he said finally. Then the sound of clapping began, softly, awkwardly, then stronger. One guest, then another. Then the entire dining room stood and applauded him. A standing ovation in a 5-star restaurant. For a waiter, he didn't know what to do with it. He nodded politely, giving a tight smile, still shaken, still trying to steady his breathing. But he knew something deep in his bones. This moment would follow him forever. What he didn't know was that not everyone was applauding, not behind closed doors, and someone in charge, was watching with a very different reaction. The applause eventually faded, but the moment lingered. Guests began to return to their meals, some still, glancing over with nods of respect. A few whispered quietly, others even waved to the waiter, mouthing thank you. The baby, now calm and dozing in her mother's arms, had no idea just how close she'd come to never waking up again. The waiter quietly excused himself and slipped into the background. His hands were trembling just a little now, not from fear, but from the release of it. The adrenaline was fading. His heart still thumped in his chest like a heavy drum. He stepped behind a service wall to catch his breath. For just a second, he let himself feel it all. The weight, the fear, the relief. He closed his eyes and exhaled slowly, but his break didn't last long. "Come with me," a voice said coldly behind him. He turned. It was the restaurant manager, sharp suit, sharp stare, no emotion on his face. The waiter followed him in silence. They walked past the guests, down the corridor, and into a small staff room. The door shut behind them with a soft but final click. The manager didn't sit down. He stayed standing, arms crossed. "What you did out there," he began, his voice, low and measured, was not acceptable. The words hit like a slap. For a moment, the waiter didn't speak. He thought maybe he'd heard wrong. He started to say, but the manager raised a hand to cut him off. "You created a disruption in the dining room. You left your post. You laid hands on a guest's child without permission. You violated multiple service protocols." The waiter blinked, his voice dry in his throat. "Sir, the baby was choking. I didn't have time to—" "That's not your call," the manager snapped. "You're a server, not a medic. We have procedures. You should have alerted security. Or a supervisor." The waiter swallowed hard, trying to keep his voice steady. "There wasn't time. If I'd waited for permission, she would have died." The manager's eyes narrowed slightly, but his expression remained cold. "And now we have guests talking, staff distracted, and an atmosphere that is no longer controlled. This is a luxury establishment, not a daycare, not an emergency room." Ow. Words echoed in the small room like poison. The waiter stared at him, stunned. "You're angry because I saved a child?" "I'm not angry," the manager replied, adjusting his tie. "I'm disappointed, and I'm holding you responsible for the disruption you caused." Silence fell between them. Heavy, bitter silence. And then came the final blow. Effective. "Immediately, your employment at Lux Grand is terminated. Clean out your locker and return your uniform before you leave." The waiter felt the air leave his lungs. "You're firing me?" he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I just saved a child's life." "You acted outside your role. You disrespected protocol. And quite frankly—" The manager leaned slightly forward, lowering his voice. "You embarrassed this hotel in front of our most valued clientele for—" A second, the waiter said nothing. He looked at the man in front of him, the polished suit, the clean smile, the hollow eyes. Something inside him twisted. Grief, confusion, then a familiar sting. A feeling he'd buried too many times before. "Would you be saying this if I looked like someone else?" he asked quietly. The manager blinked, then gave a tight fake smile. "Let's not go down that road." But the waiter saw it in his eyes, the flicker of something, the fear of being called out, the silent wall built around polite racism. The door opened suddenly. It was the man from table 4, the baby's father. He stepped into the room, face red, voice firm. "What's going on here?" "This is an internal matter, sir," the manager said quickly, voice smooth. "You fired him?" The father asked, incredulous. "This man just saved my daughter's life." "It's more complicated than that," the manager replied coolly. "No, it's not," the father snapped. "He did the right thing. You're punishing him for doing the right thing." "This is not your concern," the manager insisted, his smile thinning. "It became my concern the moment that child turned blue, and no one else did a damn thing except him." The baby's mother appeared in the doorway now too, clutching the sleeping child. Her eyes were wet, her jaw tight. The waiter stood frozen in the room, caught in the middle of a storm he never asked for. A strange mix of gratitude and humiliation filled his chest. This wasn't how heroes were supposed to be treated. This wasn't how justice worked. The manager straightened his back and said firmly, "My decision stands." The father turned to the waiter. "You're not leaving alone." "We're going to fix this." The mother stepped forward too, nodding. "You saved her life. We're not going to let this hotel throw you away like trash." The waiter said nothing. He didn't cry. He didn't yell. He just stood there quietly and felt the weight of the world settle on his shoulders all over again. The waiter stood in silence, still inside the small staff room, his hands at his sides, heart pounding, but face calm. He had no idea what came next, only that his life had just changed in a way he hadn't seen coming. Not because of what he did, but because of how someone else chose to see it. Behind him, the baby's father was still trying to process what he'd just heard. "You're actually firing him?" the man asked again, his voice tight, louder now, as if saying it out loud might make it make more sense. "He saved my daughter's life." "Yes, and caused a scene in the process," the manager replied, standing stiff as ever. "We have expectations at this establishment. Expectations he failed to meet." The mother stepped forward, her face pale, eyes locked on the manager. "He saved her. I watched it. She couldn't breathe, and he ran to her while we were too distracted to even notice." "You're calling that a failure?" "I'm calling it an unapproved action," the manager said, folding his arms. "If this were a medical facility, fine, but it's not. It's a restaurant. We have a brand to protect." The father let out a laugh, not one of humor, but disbelief. "You're worried about your brand? Your brand almost had a dead child? At one of your tables?" "I'm asking you to leave this to internal review," the manager said smoothly, as if reading from a script. But it was too late. The moment wasn't private anymore. A few guests, curious about the commotion, had gathered near the hallway. They whispered to one another, faces shifting from confusion to disbelief as pieces of the story reached them. The applause earlier had been sincere, but now the buzz in the air was different, heavier, tense, angry. The father stepped into the hallway, raising his voice now, speaking to the guests nearby. "This man," he pointed back toward the waiter, "saved my baby's life. She was choking. No one else even noticed. He jumped in, did exactly what had to be done, and now he's being fired for it." Gasps rippled across the hallway. An older woman, dressed in a navy blue suit, raised her hand. "You mean the server who helped that child? I saw it. He acted fast, calm, like a professional." "Exactly," the father replied. "And this hotel is firing him for breaking protocol." A man in a gray blazer spoke up too. "That's outrageous. He should be promoted, not punished." The mother, still holding the now sleeping baby, looked up and spoke clearly. "We trusted this place to keep us safe, and the one person who actually did is being treated like he's the problem." The manager stood frozen in the doorway now, trying to maintain control, but it was slipping. The waiter, still standing off to the side, felt something he hadn't expected to feel. Support. Real support. From people who didn't know him, didn't owe him anything, but had witnessed enough to know injustice when they saw it. "I think we need to speak to someone higher up," the father said firmly. "The owner, the board, whoever makes decisions that actually matter." "I'm afraid our general director is not available for unscheduled visits," the manager said quickly. "Then schedule it now," the father snapped. "Because I'm not leaving quietly, and neither is my lawyer." The manager stiffened, sensing the real threat behind the words. "Sir, no," the father interrupted. "You listen now. You don't get to throw people away just because they don't fit your idea of polished. You don't get to bury a hero because he doesn't wear a suit. The hallway grew quiet for a moment. Even the clinking from the dining room had gone still. Then, from the crowd of guests, someone spoke softly but clearly. "He deserves better than this." Another voice echoed, "We should write a formal complaint." Absolutely. This isn't right. The murmurs built momentum. Not a riot, not a protest, but something deeper. A collective agreement that something cruel and unfair had just happened in front of them. The waiter stood there trying to absorb it all. He wasn't used to being defended, not like this. He was used to being spoken over, looked past. But today, these people were standing up for him. The father turned to him. "We're not letting them erase what you did. You saved a life. You showed more grace and humanity than anyone here." The waiter's voice finally broke through, low and uncertain. "Thank you. But I just did what anyone would have done." "No," the mother said, stepping closer. "That's the thing. Not everyone would have, and most wouldn't have done it so calmly, so quickly, so selflessly." The father pulled a business card from his wallet and pressed it into the waiter's hand. "My office. Call me first thing tomorrow. We're going to make this right, whatever it takes." The waiter looked down at the card, fingers trembling slightly as he slid it into his pocket. He gave a small nod. He didn't have the words for the flood of emotions inside him: shame, pride, pain, and a small flicker of hope that something might still come from this. As the crowd slowly began to disperse, the manager stood alone, watching the situation unravel in front of him. His control had cracked, and the story, the real story, was already leaving the room, carried by the voices of the people who refused to be silent. The next morning, the Lux Grand Hotel looked as polished and perfect as ever. The marble floors gleamed. The bell staff lined the entrance like clockwork. Classical music played gently through the lobby, and guests drifted in with coffee in hand, dressed for meetings, massages, and brunch. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. Upstairs, behind a heavy oak door engraved with gold lettering, Evelyn Wright, the hotel's owner, sat at her desk. Her expression was still and unreadable. In front of her were two things: a printout of an email thread with several guest complaints, and a paused frame from the restaurant's security camera footage. It showed one moment in time, a waiter, arms outstretched, holding a limp baby in his hands, surrounded by stunned faces. She hit play again. She'd watched the video 3 times already that morning. No, she corrected herself, Mr. Walker had done everything right. She watched him run, gently take the baby, work with calm precision. Not a second wasted, not a moment of panic. Then she saw the baby's body jerk, the bread dislodge, and color return to her cheeks. That image had stayed with her all night. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. Her assistant stepped in. "Mr. Dawson is here, as requested." "Send him." "In." The restaurant manager entered, his posture stiff, face tight but composed. He had heard the whispers. He knew the pressure was rising, but still, he thought he could explain it all away. "Miss Wright," he said smoothly, "I understand there's been some concern about yesterday's incident. I assure you, I handled it according to company protocol." She raised her hand. "Stop." The word landed like a pin dropping on glass. She gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit down," Mr. Dawson obeyed, clearly thrown off by her tone. She took a slow breath, steady but sharp. "I've reviewed the footage. I've read the guest complaints. I've spoken to multiple staff members. And now I want to hear your explanation, not the one from the employee manual. I want the truth." Dawson shifted, voice a little quieter. "Now." The employee in question, Walker, he acted without permission. We have protocols for medical emergencies. He bypassed them. He created panic. "He saved a baby's life," she said plainly. Dawson hesitated. Yes, well, I never said he didn't. But he also caused a scene. Guests were shaken. Guests are shaken when a child is dying at a table, Mr. Dawson, she snapped. Not when someone steps in to save her. He blinked, stunned by the bite in her voice. And I've been told, she continued, eyes narrowing, that this isn't the first time your leadership has raised concerns, particularly when it comes to how you treat certain staff. I treat all my employees the same, he replied quickly, too quickly. That's the problem, she said, her voice low now. You shouldn't treat everyone the same. You should treat people with fairness, respect, and awareness of their individual struggles. She opened a file on her desk. Walker's personnel record. Impeccable. No warnings. All positive guest. Reviews. Pure feedback that spoke of calm leadership under pressure, dependability, kindness. This is a man who's lifted this hotel up every single day, and you threw him away like he was disposable. Dawson didn't reply. I'm placing you on immediate suspension, she said. Pending further review. Your behavior was not just cold, it was dangerous. And if I find any more patterns of bias or mishandling on your part, your employment will be permanently terminated. He opened his mouth as if to protest, but nothing came out. You're dismissed. He left the room, shoulders hunched, as the weight of accountability finally fell on him. Miss Wright sat back in her chair and stared at the frozen image on her screen again. The waiter holding the child, eyes focused, completely unaware of the consequences that would follow his heroism. She reached for her phone and dialed the number listed on the emergency contact card in his file. After a few rings, a quiet, cautious voice picked up. Hello? Mr. Walker, she said. This is Evelyn Wright, owner of the Lux Grand Hotel. I need to speak with you about what happened yesterday. There was silence on the other end. She continued. I watched the footage. I spoke with staff. You did nothing wrong. In fact, you did everything right. I'm calling because I want to fix this. Still silence. Then, slowly, fix it how? I want to offer you your job back. And a promotion. Head waiter. We've also launched an internal investigation into what happened. You were failed by our leadership, and I won't let it continue. He didn't answer right away. Then, I appreciate the call, but it's not just about a title. It's about trust. I don't know if I can walk back into a place that punished me for doing the right thing. Miss Wright nodded, even though he couldn't see it. That's fair, and I'm not asking for a decision right now. I just want you to know, we see you, we respect you, and we are ready to listen if you decide to come back. After a pause, he said quietly, Let me think about it. Take all the time you need, she replied gently. When she hung up, she sat in silence for a long while. Outside her window, guests moved through the manicured gardens. Bellboys rolled silver carts through the lobby. Staff polished glass doors that already sparkled. The surface still looked perfect. But inside, maybe, just maybe, the foundation had begun to change. Because sometimes, it takes one act of quiet courage to show just how broken things really are. And sometimes, the right people finally decide to fix it. The phone call stayed with him all night. Darius sat on the couch, his phone resting on the coffee table like it might ring again. His wife sat beside him, one hand on her belly, the other holding his. She had listened quietly while he told her everything. The choking baby, the applause, the manager's cold reaction, the humiliation of being fired in front of strangers. And finally, the surprise call from the hotel owner offering him his job back. He didn't know what to feel. Anger? Relief? Pride? Shame? He looked down at his wife's hand resting on her stomach and thought about the life growing inside her. About their son sleeping in the next room, his little backpack already packed for the first day of kindergarten. about the bills stacked quietly in the kitchen drawer, and about that moment in the restaurant when he'd held someone else's child and felt that terrifying sacred weight, the weight of someone else's world in his arms. His wife squeezed his hand. "What do you want to do?" "I don't know," he whispered. "Going back. It feels like swallowing everything that hurt, but walking away feels like giving up on something that could change." She looked at him, her eyes soft but firm. "Then don't just go back stronger. Make them change. Make it count." The next morning, Darius called Evelyn Wright. "I'm willing to return," he said, voice clear. "But only under 3 conditions." He outlined them carefully. First, formal accountability for the manager who fired him. No more quiet cover-ups. Second, new training across the hotel for staff on racial bias, emergency response, and guest safety. Third, a seat at the table. He wanted a voice in helping build a better workplace culture, not just for him, but for everyone else who felt invisible. Miss Wright didn't hesitate. "Agreed," she said. "All of it. We want you not just as an employee, Mr. Walker. We want you as a leader." Darius returned to the Lux Grand 1 week later, not with fear in his chest, but with purpose. Some staff welcomed him with quiet smiles and respectful nods. Others were awkward at first, unsure what to say. But there was something new in the air. A shift. A ripple of change that felt small but undeniable. His new badge said, "Head Waiter." His locker had been cleaned and reorganized. And waiting on his desk was a note from Miss Wright. "Thank you for doing what others wouldn't. You reminded us who we should be." Mr. Dawson, now demoted and under review, approached him a few days later. He stood awkwardly by the prep counter, hands clasped. Voice low. "I want to apologize," he said. "I let my judgment and my biases guide a terrible decision. You didn't deserve that. I'm trying to see things differently now." Darius looked at him, really looked. The man's posture had changed. The pride was gone. In its place, something quieter. Shame, maybe. Or humility. "Apologies matter," Darius replied calmly. "But growth matters more." And with that, they nodded to one another. Not as friends. Not yet. But as 2 men standing on opposite sides of a hard truth, finally meeting it in the middle. In the weeks that followed, the changes began. The hotel introduced a new internal policy, the Walker Standard. It emphasized not just guest service, but human decency. Emergency response training was updated. Staff sat in on open dialogue sessions about race, respect, and unconscious bias. For the first time, some employees felt seen. Darius helped lead the sessions. He stood at the front of conference rooms, wearing his new uniform, sharing his story, not to shame anyone, but to open eyes. "I wasn't looking to be a hero," he told one group. "I just did what needed to be done. But the fact that it almost cost me everything, that's what we have to fix." Guests began noticing the shift too. They wrote reviews that mentioned not just the chandeliers or the 5-star menu, but the warmth of the staff, the new tone of the place, the feeling that everyone, from guests to workers, mattered. One Saturday morning, Darius was polishing glasses when he heard a familiar voice behind him. "You're still here, huh?" He turned. It was the couple from the choking incident. The baby was now a little bigger, more alert. She smiled and reached out for him. He smiled back, taking her small hand in his. "We wanted to visit," the mother said softly. "Not just to say thank you again, but to see how things turned out." Darius nodded. "Better than I expected." The father chuckled. "You gave us our daughter's life back. We just wanted to make sure you got yours back too." Darius looked at the baby again, then around the restaurant. Everything looked the same. Tablecloths pressed, lights soft, elegance intact. But it felt different now. Not perfect, not finished, but better. As they left, the mother looked back one more time and said, "I hope this place knows how lucky they are to have you." Darius stood a little taller as he watched them go, not because he needed the praise, but because he finally believed it. He had walked through fire. He had been seen, heard, and valued, not just as a worker, but as a human being. And though the road ahead would still have its challenges, he knew one thing for sure: he had done the right thing, and finally, the world had done right by him.